Addicts, this is College Football with Sam Glasses edition. In all seriousness, tonight's going to be a pretty brief show. I want to talk about Florida, Minnesota, and Texas A&M and my record predictions for them, including looking back on the 2024 college football playoffs. And last time we looked back on it, we asked the question, who is most likely to take a step back and also miss the playoffs? But really focusing on regressing, who's the most likely to regress, take a step back, not really who's more likely to miss, perhaps. Now we are here to talk about who I think is most likely to return, irrespective of whether they're going to regress or whether they're going to advance from my perspective in the power ratings. So who's the most likely to return from the 2024 playoffs? And then, of course, some record predictions for Minnesota, for Florida, for A&M. Tomorrow is a jam-packed show. I said on Twitter that tonight would be the massive show, and some things just came up. My work at university, my one summer class, took a little bit longer today than I thought, and I haven't watched today's Big Ten Media Days segments yet, and I want to do that before I talk about Big Ten Media Days. So tomorrow and Thursday are going to be pretty big shows. You won't want to miss those. Welcome in. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell. Thank you for tuning in. And I do want to start off with the playoffs, but I just want to talk about, I think, some interesting tidbits that I heard from Big Ten Media Days today. First and foremost, I love Curt Cignetti, but come on. The schedule you're playing is nowhere near what the SEC is. I'm a Big Ten guy, but all these people acting like the average Big Ten schedule is the equivalent to the average SEC schedule is insane. Michigan and Oklahoma are almost neck and neck in preseason power ratings. Michigan's actually a little bit ahead, but not by much. Their win totals are separated by 3 whole wins. Michigan's sitting at about 9.5, juiced to the under. Oklahoma's sitting at 6.5, and I forget whether they're juiced to the over or the under. You compare Michigan and Oklahoma in their schedules, it is nowhere in the same stratosphere. If Michigan played Oklahoma's schedule of Illinois State hosting themselves in the non-con, playing at Temple, hosting Auburn, hosting Kent State, Texas neutral field, at South Carolina, Ole Miss at home, Tennessee on the road, at Alabama, Missouri, and LSU, I would pick them to do about what I'm picking Oklahoma to do, which is go 8-4, maybe 9-3. I have Michigan going 10-2. So a lot of these SEC schedules, they subtract a game or two, or in some cases even 3, off their potential wins, that if those same teams had a Big Ten schedule, they would get 1, 2, or maybe even 3 more wins than if they had the SEC schedule. The exception, of course, is Wisconsin. Wisconsin could, and just intuitively, I think, does have the nation's toughest schedule, but not every Big Ten school has a Wisconsin schedule. I know not every SEC school has a Florida or Oklahoma schedule, but the average SEC schedule is tougher than the average Big Ten schedule. And while the SEC, yes, I know some of their non-conference slates, they only schedule G5 or FCS teams, or they schedule most of their non-conference games with G5 or FCS opponents. They also schedule some tough opponents. So, I mean, Auburn plays at Baylor, LSU plays at Clemson, Texas A&M plays at Notre Dame, Georgia last year played both Georgia Tech and Clemson, Texas plays at Ohio State, Alabama plays both Wisconsin and Florida State. I know most of these schools have an FCS opponent in late November. Texas doesn't, but they're one of the exceptions to the rule. And I know that they only have 8 conference games, but the SEC is a slightly tougher league top to bottom than the Big Ten, and they at least try to get a Power 4 non-conference opponent for each of their schools. Though sometimes teams slip through the cracks, like Ole Miss, for example, they're not playing any Power opponents. They're not in their non-conference schedule. I mean, Georgia State, Tulane, Washington State, and the Citadel. I love Curt Cignetti. To a certain degree, I get his point because his non-conference strength of schedule isn't really weaker than Ole Miss's, but I think that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater there. Just my opinion. Another thing, looking at, Ohio State, and Ryan Day spoke today about how just kept it simple, how we're going to beat Michigan in 2025 is we're just going to score more points than them. It's probably the simple answer. I think the more you talk about the game with the media, if you're Ohio State right now, you don't want to talk about it much. You want to work. You want to make sure you can beat Michigan for the first time in 4 or 5 years. So just say we're going to score more points than them, or that's what we're going to try to do. Zip it, throw the key out. I like it. You look at Nebraska and Matt Rule. Matt Rule, I saw a clip of him mentioning how he wasn't really bothered by Scott Frost's comments, yet at the same time clearly flexing and talking about how Nebraska's in a really good position from his perspective as a program, that Nebraska, I can feel the confidence in his voice, even though I didn't listen to him or Raiola really talk about the team. This was just about him talking about Nebraska's program while he's been there, in contrast to where it was when he took over from Frost. I think that Nebraska believes in themselves for maybe the first time in a decade, or over a decade, or maybe just under a decade. I think winning culture is back in Lincoln, and that is a huge deal because Nebraska's not had a winning culture in a long time, and they have the talent and many other things to be successful. So let's dive in here, and let's talk about the college football playoff, last year's participants, and who I think can make a return. Also, again, Florida, Minnesota, and A&M. So let's begin and discuss who I think is most likely to return to the college football playoffs from 2024. The 2024 college football playoff was the first of its type to feature 12 teams, whereas the previous college football playoffs only featured 4 teams. Almost exclusively, except for Cincinnati when they made it in 2021, from the Power 4 conferences. Now you have a guaranteed G5 berth, and you have guaranteed berths for all Power 4 conference teams. So Big 12, ACC, Big 10, SEC. 12 teams made it last year, no duh. And those teams were Boise State, Arizona State, this is in no order, SMU, Oregon, Georgia, Penn State, Ohio State, Texas, Tennessee, Indiana. Oh man, yeah, I should have had the list in front of me before doing that. Rookie mistake there. Yeah, they're Tennessee, Arizona State, Boise State, Indiana, SMU, Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Oregon, Clemson, and Penn State. All those teams made it last year. Which of the 2024 college football playoff participants, which of them, are going to make a return for the 2025 college football playoff? Well, we're going to figure that out right here. So it's my belief, personally, that you'll see maybe half of these teams, anywhere from half of them, so 6 to 75% of them, in that 6 to 9 range of the 2024 teams return for the 2025 college football playoff. I believe that the 2025 playoff is going to be more exciting than the 2024 college football playoff with these new changes. So with that in mind, and with the fact that many of the teams who made it in 2024 are yet again favored to make it again in 2025, and the ones that aren't they're a puncher's chance away. They're really just a few layers away from being in that conversation of returning. Let's discuss who I think are the teams from 2024 that have the best shot to return in 2025. Not regress, not improve, just straight up who I think is the best chance to return to the 2025 college football playoff from the 2024 college football playoff. So we're going to start off from who I think is the least likely chance to make it again for the second year in a row, and we will finish with the team who I think has the best chance, who's most likely, whose probability is the highest to make it as they did in 2024. So I think that Tennessee is the least likely to make it from 2024. They finished 10-3, 6-2 in the SEC, in which they were third, lost in the first round of the college football playoffs to Ohio State. When I look at Tennessee, I am concerned about Joey Aguilar. He's not as talented as Nico Imaliava, and I'm concerned about Tennessee's offensive line. I'm really concerned about their tackle group on offense, their quarterback overall, receiver could be a concern, and they lost a lot on the defensive line. The limitation they have at quarterback, they had a myriad of issues last year. The defense covered up a lot of them, same with Dylan Sampson. I still think the run game will be strong, but probably not as strong as it was last year with the losses on the interior, the loss of Dylan Sampson, and then they lost James Pierce Jr. They lost much of their defensive front. They returned a bunch of their secondary. But this is a team that, based on recruiting and based on what I think they wanted to be this year, was going to try to be more of an outside team like what they were in 21 or 22. And then the QB change happened, and everything else on the outside except for the secondary was already uncertain. So receiver was uncertain. Now quarterback is. And this is a team that I think will struggle to have a strong identity roster-wise, not culture-wise. I like Heupel. I actually like him and his staff overall. And I, again, believe that running back, tight end, I think D-end will reload more than some people believe. And then, obviously, you got to look at Jermon McCoy and others at corner. They only bring back 51% of their production, though. Their preseason SP Plus is an 18.4. You can see the schedule on your screen, but their biggest games are Georgia at home week 3, Alabama on the road week 8, Florida on the road week 13. They're going to be underdogs in all of those games. And would you pick Tennessee to win any of those games right now? I wouldn't. And then Syracuse week 1, Syracuse is going to come out motivated. That's not a guaranteed win. Oklahoma profiles as better than Tennessee this year, but Tennessee gets them at home. Not a guaranteed win. They couldn't beat Arkansas last year, and while Arkansas loses a lot, so does Tennessee. This is a team that probably has to go, not probably, they definitely have to go 10-2. Definitely with this schedule to reach the playoffs, and I think 10-2 is pretty unlikely. Honestly, I think this is more an 8-4, 9-3 team, and 10-2 I think is the hard cap ceiling for Tennessee football in 2025. I think that this was tough. It was between Arizona State, SMU, Boise State, and Indiana for who I think is the second least likely. So Tennessee was the least likely, 12th at my mind in terms of who's most likely to return to the playoffs from 2024. Arizona State's 11th here. This has more to do with the conference they reside in than anything else. They should be, for example, better than Tennessee. I would pick them to beat Tennessee neutral field this season, and I wouldn't say that for most Big 12 teams, even over a mid-tier SEC team, which is what Tennessee is. Arizona State should be really good with Sam Leavitt, and they finished 11-3, 7-2, won the Big 12. They lost in the quarterfinals to Texas in a game that Arizona State could have won, just ultimately did not win. Arizona State's schedule is very, very doable. But they won the majority of their close games last year, and just one slip up, given the fact they play in the Big 12, can kick them out. I think that defying the law of close games is something that's very tough, and last year they lost to, if my memory serves me correctly, I think they lost to Texas Tech, lost to Cincinnati, nearly lost to Texas State. Mississippi State was a close game as well, and BYU was a close game. They played a lot of these teams competitively and then peaked in their final 2 games, the Big 12 championship game and the quarterfinals where they got a bye. I like their staff. I love the QB situation, but the team ceiling, I believe, is limited. Wide receiver depth is a concern. They need to have wide receivers step up, need to have them step up if Scatabo is, if he's going to be replaced. And that's another question. Can he be adequately replaced? I think that defensive tackle is another area with some concern. I pretty much love everything else, though. Leavitt at quarterback. I like their trenches overall. I think that running back, while it will take a step back, is still going to be good at a Big 12 level. Defensive back, I like, and then wide receiver on with Jordan Tyson is going to be strong. Arizona State being down the list here has to do with their talent, winning a bunch of close games, and also the conference they reside in. They return 79% of their production. From a power rating standpoint, they should be better than last season. It's why they're ahead of Tennessee, who should be worse than last season, and whose schedule's easy enough to where they have to go 10-2 to get in. But Arizona State, there's no guarantees here. They're not even a favorite to reach the college football playoff or win their conference this year. And if you make it to the conference championship game, in the SEC, the Big Ten, you're guaranteed to get in, barring some insane scenario where a 3 or 4 loss team gets in and loses. And then in the ACC, as long as you get in with a loss, you're guaranteed a spot. SMU showed that last year, as long as your strength of schedule isn't extremely easy like SMU's was. In the Big 12, an 11-2 team would get left out if they lost their conference championship game. So that's why I have Arizona State so low. Okay, now that you kind of get the logic behind this, I think that I'm not going to explain as much why I think these teams are placed where they're at in comparison to other teams. Boise State's placed low, 10th most likely to return from 2024 to the playoffs because, once again, they're in the Mountain West. You can really only afford a loss, maybe 2 at the most, but in the Mountain West especially, I think just 1 loss, as the G5 bid is just for the G5. It's not for one specific conference. Boise State was carried by Ashton Jeanty last year. They finished 12-2, 8-0. Only loss in the regular season was to Oregon, and then they lost to Penn State in the quarterfinals. So their 2 losses were the 2 participants in the Big Ten championship game last year. The question for Boise State, if they want to return to being semi-competitive with those teams, and if they also want to repeat as Mountain West champions and be the best G5 team and get into the playoffs again, is whether or not Jeanty can be replaced. And what's the ceiling of the returning players? Because Jeanty, drafted in the first round, best running back, I think, of the 2024 college football season by a long shot. I mean, even against Penn State and even against Oregon, he performed at a high level when his supporting cast did not do so well. Specifically the offensive line against Penn State, but who can blame you when you're playing that type of defense that Penn State fielded? Anyway, not to get too far ahead of myself, Boise State has a key Power 4 game like they did last season. They have it against Notre Dame this year in Week 6 on the road. Some key games in Mountain West play, I would say, are at Air Force. Air Force is a team that should rebound from last year. At Nevada. Nevada, I think, is a really good Mountain West staff. Got to host Fresno State Week 10. And then they also have to host UNLV Week 8. And then they have a non-conference game at USF in Week 1 that I think could be a little bit tricky, for sure. I like their offense and their defensive front for Boise State, but that secondary and then the running back situation and what they have at wide receiver, because they did lose some at wide receiver. They have a lot of returning production and I think an elite culture, but if they just mess up one game and say Tulane goes undefeated, or they mess up a game and Army or Navy goes undefeated, like some thought they were going to last year, even though I don't know how you thought that when they were playing Notre Dame, then they'll get left out. So they're higher than Arizona State and Tennessee because of what they bring back and the fact that I think they're head and shoulders above the rest of the G5 except for maybe Tulane. They're still pretty low, though, because at the end of the day, they're in the G5 and they need to have other things go their way that are outside of their control, like what happens in other G5 conferences to get in the playoffs. At 9th most likely to return from 2024, we have Indiana. Now, this is a change of tune from me compared to some of my previous videos or topics I have discussed in relationship to Indiana football. They had a miracle season last year. I still am of the belief that they will progress instead of regress in terms of their roster. However, looking at their schedule, Week 7, they got to play at Oregon. Week 11, they got to play at Penn State. Week 5, they got to play at Iowa. Illinois in Week 4 and Michigan State in Week 8 are probably not going to be cupcakes. Same with Wisconsin in Week 12 if they somehow are able to manage that tough schedule. There are enough games for a slip-up where I think that Indiana's likelihood to return to the playoffs is lower than I previously anticipated. Indiana with this schedule, especially if one of or both Oregon and Penn State blow them out, is not getting in. They have to go 11-1. If they go 10-2 and get in, it's because they play both Penn State and Oregon competitively. Probably not just one, but both. And I don't think they'll play Penn State competitively. It's a bad matchup. And for Oregon, it's not quite as bad of a matchup, but you have to travel all the way across the country. Oregon also comes off of a bye, which neuters you coming off of a bye, and they have way more talent than you. So for the Hoosiers, reloading is imperative this year. But even if they do that, they probably can't go 12-0, and 11-1 is possible, but is that the most likely outcome? I don't think so. I'm very high on this team. They bring back 62% of their production. S&P Plus actually has them preseason top 25. I think they'll be a top 15, top 10 team this year. I think Mendoza will be an upgrade over Rourke. Their O-line is much better than it was last year. The receiver core is about the same, and that was pretty good. Secondary should be better. Linebacker should reload. I think D-line will reload, be a little bit stronger at D-end. Actually, it'll be significantly stronger at D-end, but weaker at defensive tackle with C.J. West leaving. Indiana is lower because of their schedule, their brand, also the lack of talent, and just their historical performance. And by lack of talent, I mean NFL talent. Oregon and Penn State undisputedly have more NFL talent than Indiana does. I'd love to place them higher, but I just can't right now. At 8th, we have SMU. SMU. Now, this is interesting that I have them ahead of Indiana, but that is because their two big games are Clemson on the road and Miami at home. So one of their big games is at home, and even though I think Oregon will be much better than Miami and Penn State will be much better than Miami and Clemson, perceptionally, especially since SMU plays, and let me just show you, let's get it out of the way. In non-conference, they play Baylor at home and TCU on the road. If SMU goes 10-2, that is a stronger resume than what Indiana does at 10-2, especially when you add in Louisville in Week 13, if Louisville is indeed good, for example. That's why I put SMU a little bit ahead of Indiana there, even though they lose a little bit more production and are going to start the season, in my mind, as a worse team. Although S&P Plus disagrees. They're 20th in preseason S&P Plus, and SMU returns about 60% of their production. My concerns are wide receiver and roster upside, although I think SMU is building a good recruiting base and a good recruited roster, or well-recruited roster. Interior O-line and running back are areas that could regress as well, but I love Kevin Jennings at quarterback. They could have the best tight end duo in the nation with R.J. Maryland and Matthew Hibner. I love their safeties. SMU safeties are among the nation's best. You have Ahmad Moses, who I think is the most well-known, but also Isaiah Nwokobia. Wonderful safety room that SMU has. They have good linebackers. I like their defensive line. I think this defense will be good. It'll be an underrated unit for sure. Again, Baylor at home Week 2, TCU on the road Week 4, Clemson on the road Week 8, and Miami at home Week 10, Louisville at home Week 13. There's just more opportunities in big games for SMU here because there are more big games, and they aren't as daunting as, let's say, for Indiana, Oregon, or Penn State, or for Boise State at Notre Dame, or for Tennessee playing Georgia or Alabama. You have some more good teams on SMU's schedule, where on the other schedules we talked about, they have fewer good teams, but far more elite teams in many cases, or they're in just a conference that's so weaker they can't afford screw-ups. So SMU should be a worse quality team, but I don't know, guys. They have a shot to make this thing again, a better shot than a lot of people expect. Moving on from SMU, I think there is a little bit of a separation here, where Notre Dame has much better odds to remake the college football playoff compared to any of the teams before them. So I have Notre Dame as the 7th most likely team to return from 2024. Obviously, the national championship runner-ups finished 14-2. Their losses were to Ohio State and NIU by a combined 13 points. And then they beat Georgia, they beat Indiana, they beat USC, they beat Penn State, they beat a lot of top-tier brands and a lot of good teams. Also, they beat A&M on the road Week 1 before losing to NIU. So, when talking about the Irish, the reason I don't have them higher is they do lose a good chunk, 56%. The reason I don't have them lower is because they're very talented, and this is not one of the toughest schedules in the world. For example, you got a 24.9 SP Plus rating preseason, which is 6th. They only bring back 56% of their production, sure, but Notre Dame has recruited well under Freeman. They've developed well under Freeman. The questions I have for Notre Dame is, how good is CJ Carr this year? How good is he as a redshirt freshman? And with the amount of outgoing starters on the D-line, some overall on defense like Xavier Watts at safety, and then going from Al Golden to Chris Ash, can Freeman maintain defensive excellence? They fielded top 10, top 5 defenses the past 2 years. Can they do that now for a third year in a row? They're going to be tested week 1 against Miami at home, and then, or on the road rather, and then A&M at home week 3. Arkansas on the road week 5. That is going to be a tricky spot because weird things happen in Fayetteville. And Arkansas has a good enough QB and maybe good enough overall roster talent to hang with Notre Dame if they're not able to pull away on offense or generate a bunch of turnovers. USC at home week 8, that's going to be tough. And then at Pittsburgh week 12. Those are the games I'm circling for Notre Dame on their schedule. Just don't have the time to go through the entire schedule, and you can see it on the screen, obviously, for all these teams that we talk about. I don't have them higher because I think they benefited from a lot last year, and a lot went their way last year. I mean, yes, they lost to NIU, but they played A&M competitively. That they could have lost that game. NIU was competitive. They played USC competitively. Then they played Georgia and Penn State competitively. And then Ohio State was less competitive than any of those other games. So Notre Dame really won a lot of uber competitive games, and they lose a lot. The team is young. There's a coordinator change, and there's just some tricky games on their schedule. So that is why I have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish behind, for example, Georgia, who I have at 6th. Georgia plays in a tougher conference. They have a conference championship game, so that helps some things. And I think Georgia's roster will be better than Notre Dame's this year. Phil Steele disagrees with me, but yeah, right back at you. I disagree with you too. Georgia finished 11-3, lost to Notre Dame in the quarterfinals. When I look at the Bulldogs and observe this team, their schedule matches up much better with their goal of reaching the playoffs again, winning the SEC again, and winning the national championship for the first time since 2022. Instead of playing Alabama and Ole Miss and Texas on the road, they get all of them at home. Instead, your road schedule is at Mississippi State, at Auburn, and at Tennessee, none of whom I think are top 15 teams. Georgia Tech is a neutral field, not a home game, but still neutral site probably means it'll be a mostly Georgia crowd, for example. My only question with Georgia really is Gunnar Stockton. Is he as bad as some people think, or is he good enough to mitigate his weaknesses, or maybe is he good enough to be a Stetson Bennett, Carson Beck role player, maybe not have their same upside, but make up for it in the ground and still have good throws? That, I think, is what determines this team, because I think the O-line should regress to the mean in a positive way in terms of college. I think the rushing attack will be better, and the defense should be about the same or maybe even better. They've gone 2 years in a row not having a top 10 defense per ESPN's efficiency metrics. They only bring back 46% of their production, but Georgia's done this before. They have, where they lose a bunch, reload, perform at the same level or better. Their preseason SP Plus is 4th at a 26.9 rating, and I believe that this Georgia team is going to make the playoffs. We have a little bit of separation yet again. Quarterback's the only concern, maybe O-line and D-line in terms of depth, but I like the starters there overall, and they're still deeper at O-line and defensive back in really every position, even wide receiver now, compared to anywhere from 95 to 100% of other programs, excluding Georgia. So Kirby Smart and this program are in good hands. Yet again, I think there's another jump, smaller than the jump from, much smaller than going from SMU to Notre Dame, but still a noticeable jump too, I think, in terms of odds to return going from Notre Dame to Georgia. At 5th, we have the Ohio State Buckeyes. They are on here because while they have, I think, maybe the toughest 3-game slate in the country, Ohio State does, in my opinion. They won the national title last year, 14-2, 7-2. It doesn't have much of an impact on how I view this team this year. What does is they have the 2 best players in football. They have 2 freebies in the non-con, Ohio and Grambling State, and they have a lot of what should be freebies in conference. So Georgia's schedule and Notre Dame's, and really every schedule I've talked about before this, except for maybe if you factor in relative to talent, Indiana playing, at Iowa, at Oregon, and at Penn State. Relative to Indiana's talent, that's probably much harder for Indiana to overcome than for Ohio State to overcome Texas, Penn State at home, and Michigan on the road. If you don't take into account the team talent playing these schedules, I think that Texas at home and Penn State at home and at Michigan on the road might be the toughest 3-game group in college football this year. Might be. Again, don't quote me on that, but it's definitely up there. And Ohio State loses over half of their production. They're first in preseason S&P Plus for sure, but this is the first time in a while. It's actually the first time, I think, ever under Day that Ohio State has changed both offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Much like with Georgia, depth isn't the same for everyone, but especially the teams at the top in the way that it used to be. And I believe that, again, Ohio State for the positive, I think every game outside of those 3, Ohio State will be favored in by double digits. They'll probably be favored at Michigan or at least be a small underdog. And Penn State and Texas, they're going to be favored against Texas. The only game in which they could be underdogs are probably Penn State and Michigan. And according to preseason odds, that's unlikely. I'm concerned about the interior of the O-line, D-line. I think that tackle for Ohio State is fine because of Saraveld and how they've praised him, and then Ethan Anainwa. You also have linebacker, which is going to be great on defense. Receiver room will be the best in the country. I'm not concerned with Julian Sayin at all. Part of me thinks that maybe I should be a little bit more concerned, but I'm not. I'm going to throw caution to the wind there and say that he's a good QB. Again, Texas at home, week 1. Penn State at home, week 10. Michigan on the road, week 14. And then you have that stretch from week 5 to week 8 where they play at Washington, Minnesota at home, at Illinois, and at Wisconsin. There's just enough games where I could see them slip up and lose 3, and they're probably not getting in with, unless... They're probably not getting in with 3 losses to the playoffs with this schedule because you have Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers, Ohio, Grambling State, and then one of Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, and Wisconsin will probably finish with a losing record. So that's why I don't have Ohio State higher, but it's also why I don't have them lower exactly. This is a team that should make the playoffs again based on odds. Right now, they're actually the favorite to have an undefeated season per FanDuel Sportsbook. Let's move on to Texas at 4th. Texas, what I love about the Longhorns this year is that they lose so much, but in a way that I think is different from Georgia, Oregon, and Ohio State, where they lose a lot. And unlike Georgia, who just had so much go wrong for them last year that I think they just regressed to the mean, unlike Ohio State and Oregon, who I think they're getting drastically younger. Ohio State's having coordinator changes. Oregon is one of the youngest, if not the youngest team at the top in terms of being a top 5 talent roster or a top 10 talent roster and a top 10, top 5 preseason team. Phil Steele doesn't even have Oregon in his preseason top 10, but we'll talk about Oregon here shortly. Texas, I think, is built roster-wise to possibly get better from last year. Now, I don't think they will be better, at least right now, but I think they will be a similar caliber team, and I think in the big games against the good defenses, they will be better built to have success there. Whether or not Texas is talented enough to reload or improve is still a question, though, but I think they at least have a better chance at doing that than Georgia, Oregon, or Ohio State. And the special teams unit was awful last season. Can that unit take a leap is a question. Week 1, they play at Ohio State. Week 4, they week 6, not 4. Week 6 they play at Florida, and week 12 they play at Georgia. That slate right there, that 3-game bunch, might be as tough or tougher than Ohio State's. Might be, where they play, Texas at home, Penn State at home, Michigan on the road. Might be. I have it as a little bit below, but it's close. Here's the difference between those teams, though. Oklahoma's tough, but I think Texas is a good matchup against Oklahoma. You look at, Kentucky, Mississippi State on the road, those will not be tough road games, from my estimation. A&M is at home, and then before the Georgia game, you get Vanderbilt at home and then a bye. After the Georgia game, you have Arkansas at home and not on the road, and Arkansas loses a bunch. I think that Texas's schedule is comparable to Ohio State's. So yes, if they also go 9-3, they're not making it. But they've done a good job developing on the O-line. I think it'll be a concern early in the year, perhaps, but by the end of the year, we'll be rolling. Quarterback, they have experience there with Manning. It's limited, but more in-game experience at the school than Dante Moore at Oregon, Gunnar Stockton at Georgia, or Julian Sain at Ohio State. They get healthier at running back. So last year, Texas was decimated with injuries at running back. They get Baxter back. They use the portal well at D-line and also at tight end. And look, I love where Texas is at despite all they lost. There's always that team that is the exception to the rule in terms of returning production, and I think this year Texas is going to be that team. So that's why I have them at 4th. Oregon is at 3rd. Now, the Oregon Ducks are a team that I just somewhat criticized a few seconds ago, where I talked about how Oregon is very young. Oregon is not quite there in terms of raw talent that Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia are by high school recruiting rankings, though they're close. They have the exact same blue chip ratio as Texas. But I think Texas has done a slightly better job, especially recently, in recruiting. Texas has brought in more bodies. Texas hasn't used the portal as much, especially on the offensive line. And I think Texas's staff is a little bit better, just a little bit better than Oregon's. However, when I observe the Ducks, I believe that the advantage they have over, say, Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia is their schedule. Look at this schedule here. I'll actually go through this, unlike the other schedules, to show you how easy this is relative to a team at the top like Oregon. So week 1, Montana State, week 2, Oklahoma State, week 3 at Northwestern, week 4 hosting Oregon State. Toughest game by a mile's at Penn State week 5. But after that, off the week 6 bye, Indiana at home, Rutgers on the road week 8, Wisconsin at home week 9, bye week 10, at Iowa week 11, hosting Minnesota week 12, hosting USC week 13, playing at Washington week 14. Now, at the same time, there's variability with the schedule. So Ohio State and Texas and Georgia, I don't think they have the same amount of trap games. They don't have as many landmines, as many potential humiliating losses. And because of where they're located, they also don't have the same travel. So I don't like Oregon's travel, where you have to travel to Penn State, and then a few weeks later you got to travel to Rutgers, and then a few weeks later you got to travel to Iowa. And then it's not the worst in the world, but then also before they have to travel to Penn State, 2 weeks before that, they have to travel to Northwestern. That will add up. That's not something you get over in just 2 weeks, for example, especially as you begin, travel, back and forth from, Chicago and back, Happy Valley and back, Piscataway and back, Iowa and back, and then Seattle and back. Or I think it's Des Moines for Iowa. I forget, or maybe I just listed Iowa State. Help me if I just listed Iowa's rival, Iowa State, and the city Iowa State's located in. But the travel's tougher. There are more trap games, but there are no teams outside of Penn State that I think can punch with Oregon if Oregon plays to their A games. That's why I give them a better chance than Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas to make it. Georgia has the benefit of they can go 9-3 and make the playoffs with that schedule, but that's also a downside. And they have the least amount of upside of any of these teams just because of the questions at QB that they have and how much they lost at O-line and how bad that unit was last year. With Oregon, they have a floor that's very low. It's probably the lowest floor out of all these teams I'm talking about, but their ceiling could be second. I think one of Ohio State or Texas will definitely have a higher ceiling. And on top of that, their schedule, I believe, is the easiest. I'm high on their defensive front. I'm high on the starting offensive line, tight end, running back, and I think Dante Moore will pan out just fine, especially since I believe Decorian Moore will be a breakout player. At second, we have the Clemson Tigers. Clemson, the reason I have them this high is because they bring back, after a 10-4, 7-1 campaign, they return a whopping 80% of their production, which is first. They are a favorite to reach the playoffs. I have no idea why their win total is over under 9.5. Part of it may be that they were 0-3 against the SEC last year, and they have 2 SEC opponents. And recently, they have done very poorly in big games. Very, very, very poorly. They've underperformed relative to their talent. Excuse me there. I think guard is their only concern, but everything else I love. Quarterback Cade Klubnik, wide receivers, Brian Wetsko, Antonio Williams, TJ Moore, center Ryan Lithincum, their defensive line with TJ Parker, Peter Woods, Will Helt, DeMonte Capehart, and then corner Avion Terrell. Their staff is great. Their culture is great. I think that there are other spots that could be strengths. Guard and potentially how good the rushing offense are my only questions, along with how quickly can Tom Allen fix the defense, because it was pretty bad last year given the talent, and what's up with the inconsistency in big games. What's up with that? Their schedule, LSU at home week 1, South Carolina on the road week 14, those might be their toughest games of the year, and I think Clemson is easily a touchdown better than those teams this season. Louisville on the road week 12, Duke at home week 10 off the bye, SMU at home week 8, and North Carolina week 6 on the road, Georgia Tech week 3 on the road. They have a lot of trap games, Clemson does. It's a schedule that I think in that regard is similar to Oregon. The difference is Clemson is much older than Oregon. Much older and much more proven, even though I think Oregon now in the 2 deep probably has higher quality athletes than not Penn State. Probably that's the case for Penn State. Definitely, I think the case for Clemson. Clemson starters, however, better athletically, older, bigger than Oregon's, for example. That matters here, and they don't play Penn State on the road. Their toughest opponent will either be South Carolina, Louisville, Georgia Tech, SMU, maybe Duke or LSU. And they get some of those games at home, and none of those teams will be as good as Penn State. As for Clemson, I am picking them to win the ACC this year, so I think that they are as close to a lock to the playoffs as you could get, with one exception. That exception being Penn State. So Penn State, I just mentioned how Oregon, I believe, has better athletes in the 2 deep, not up front than Clemson, but in the 2 deep. So when you get to the second stringers, I think Oregon's second stringers are better than a lot of Clemson's second stringers. It's probably based on high school talent, the same with Penn State, but also maybe not. I certainly believe that statement I made to be true with Clemson. With Penn State, I'd have to dig into it more, because Penn State's blue chip ratio is one of the higher BCRs in recent memory. It's 68%, close to 70%, and they're old. And their O-line blue chip ratio is in the 70s, and they're big, and they're experienced. They have 6 or 7, if not maybe 8 playable offensive linemen that would be good by Big Ten standards. That's impressive. They have 2 tight ends who fit that bill, 3 wide receivers, which isn't much, but much more than last year. Aller could be round 1, pick 1 in the 2026 NFL draft, and they got Jim Knowles on defense. So Jim Knowles and Andy Kotelnicki and their strength and conditioning staff headed by Chuck Losey, that and some of their other assistants makes me believe they have the best assistant staff and coordinators in America, combined with what I think is the best overall roster. Their schedule is really, in my mind, a 2-game schedule. I don't think this team is going worse than 10-2. I believe this team is a lock to reach the playoffs. A lock. They're guaranteed to get in. Everyone else on this list I could see missing, with, of course, it's tough for me to pick Ohio State, Oregon, Clemson, Georgia to miss. It just is. Or Texas, for example. Clemson's close to a lock, but if they go 10-2 regular season and lose in the ACC championship game, they're not getting in. At Penn State, if they go 10-2 regular season, even if they lose in the Big Ten championship game, they probably get in as maybe the last overall seed, because they have two big games and then games against Indiana, Iowa on the road, Nebraska at home, Michigan State on the road. Rutgers returns a lot, so maybe Rutgers will get better than last year and be a top 25 team. They have enough games to where if they lose their two big games but they're competitive, the playoff will probably still let them in. I think it's a two-game schedule. I don't think they're losing to anyone except for Oregon at home week 5. That's going to be the whiteout game at night, or Ohio State on the road week 10, also off of a bye, and this time that game's at noon. So in both of their biggest games, the environments, given where they're played, play to Penn State's advantage the best. They have far more experience, far more seniority than either of those teams, and they're bigger than both now. On the they're bigger than Ohio State on the D-line. They're bigger than Oregon on the D-line, I believe, too, although I don't think to the same degree. Ohio State's D-line's quite small relative to what they were last year. And then offensive line-wise, they have a lot more continuity than Oregon does. Not the same type of continuity distance between their O-line and Ohio State's O-line, but still continuity distance. And they've recruited better than both those teams by a mile on the O-line. And I just believe that with the trench advantage they have over both teams, the fact they've caught up to both through the air, them having Jim Knowles at DC, who shut down Oregon the second time he faced him, and who knows Ohio State's offense, back-to-back, although, to be fair, Ohio State's offense, in theory, should know his defense back-to-back, even with the coordinator change. A lot plays in Penn State's favor. So I believe that Penn State has the best odds to return from the 2024 playoffs to the 2025 college football playoff. Thank you for tuning into that segment with me. Before I move on, I just want to text a friend because he was calling me. Just 1 second. Okay, there. Just wanted to reply to that. Okay. Yeah, that was a good segment. Always go longer on those than I anticipate. Oh, we have a super chat. In fact, we have two. So let me pop this out and let's do this thing right here. Let me get the pop out chat, read these, and then we will move on to our next segments, which are the record predictions. Probably go a little bit quicker on these than we did for some of the other ones because we're talking about some teams that, just aren't going to make the national championship and are smaller. But still, we want to give analysis for those. Chris Lane, thank you for the $2 super chat. He says, Ohio State versus Grambling State, which band wins? I knew Ohio State's band is known as the best in the land. But is Grambling State's well known? I assume by your comment they are that well known. Okay, let me look at some other comments here. Thank you again, Chris Lane, for that $2 super chat. I really appreciate it. Gregory, okay, this is a hilarious comment. Seems Texas has too many of the 6'7", 377, 4.77 athletes. Yeah, they're huge and they're quick. They're fast and big. That's why I give them, even with all they lost, and the fact they don't have the same BCR as Georgia or Ohio State. That's why I gave them a better chance to make the playoff than both those teams. Because sure, their BCRs aren't quite there yet, but there is something in that Texas soil, or something in those high school locker rooms, or something that Texas does to their kids when they get on field to where they're bigger than Ohio State right now. I've looked at this. They either match Ohio State in size everywhere except for Jeremiah Smith, or they're bigger. And I would not be shocked if that were the same case with Georgia. Probably to a smaller degree in the trenches, but Georgia's wide receivers probably aren't as big as Ohio State's either. So Texas is just this big athletic team in a way that is, it kind of reminds me of those Georgia teams in 2021 or 2022 and the Alabama teams under Saban. Like, I think if there's any team that is going to be the heir of Saban's program of stacking talent, that it's Texas. They won't be anywhere close because of the portal, and I do not think Sark is the same game manager as Saban. Like, Sark is a CEO type. Saban was the jack of all trades where he was an elite CEO and an elite game manager. Sark, I think, is like Franklin if Franklin learned how to recruit under Nick Saban. I do not like Sark's game management. I mean, last year, that team, I think if games were managed better, could have gone, 15-1 or 16-1, and they win out after that Georgia game mid-season, or maybe they go 16-0 if things are managed better. You could say the same thing with Ohio State, but I don't think Ohio State's problem last year, outside of the Michigan game and maybe the Nebraska game, they only lost one of those. I don't think their problem there was multiple instances of bad game management or randomly choking, like Texas. I think that their problems had more so to do with how they recruited and developed the roster at certain positions, which is why they ultimately beat Texas, because if the talent is similar, and Ohio State was more talented than Texas, just not as balanced, coaching wins out. And Ohio State was much better coached than Texas was last year. So Justin Ziegler, he sent in a $10 super chat. He says, something else helping Oregon is Dan Lanning. Comes down to Moore, who benefits with Lanning, his work with QBs, but still a question mark there. What teams make the playoffs who missed the 2024 playoffs? Glad you asked that question. I will give you a brief answer on that based on my current playoff bracket, which is going to release this weekend. So I have teams making it who made it last year. This is a sneak peek. This is my playoff, not bracket, but just the teams I have making it, so pay close attention. I have Texas, Penn State, Georgia, and Clemson making it, who went last season. I also have Oregon making it from last year, and Boise State representing the G5 again. So I have about half of last year's participants making it yet again. And some teams who are on the outside looking in who made it last year are SMU, Louisville, Ohio State, and Indiana. I think those teams all be ranked anywhere from, top 20 to top 15 in the final CFP rankings. And some of them, like Ohio State, will be power rated like they should be a team in consideration for a bye. And Indiana will be power rated in the sense that they should be either hosting a game or, at least being in the first round. But power ratings is not strength of record. And the committee, I think, has explicitly rejected the idea of power ratings. That's why Ole Miss was never going to make the playoffs last year. It came down to Alabama or SMU, and Ole Miss, once you kind of dulled down the recruiting rankings, was power rated ahead of both. And I think Ole Miss at the end of the year had much more potential than either of those teams. The potential of Alabama and SMU were closer together than the end of season potential for Ole Miss. But Ole Miss's losses and schedule was so bad that they could never be let in, ever. They would have put in Miami. If memory serves me correctly, I think they would have put Miami in ahead of Ole Miss, which I think, honestly, made sense last year, given the losses that both incurred, even though Ole Miss had that Georgia victory. But speaking of teams that I have making it that didn't make it last year, I have Utah representing the Big 12, and then I have new Big 10 representatives. So Indiana and Ohio State are out. And I know I said my Indiana record predictions. I know I said it, and I will update that when I do my Indiana deep dive, mentioning that I don't have them making the playoffs anymore. I just have a hard time seeing them. I can see it happening more than anyone else can. Indiana going up to Autzen, catching an Oregon team that is on fire but young, bit inexperienced, bit up and down, and pulling off a tight win. But the likelihood of that happening is small. So since I'm already making some bold predictions, I just wanted to pull back on that one a bit, especially since Indiana did so well last year that there is a chance things come crashing down. I wanted to go more toward the median mean with my IU prediction than picking them to do the best they could at all possible. So picking lightning in a bottle to happen for 2 years in a row. Although I will contend, last season was not as lightning in a bottle for Indiana as Michigan State in 21, TCU in 22, or LSU in 2019, for example. But, yet again, Indiana does not have anywhere close to Oregon or Penn State's talent. So out again with Indiana and Ohio State, in with Michigan and USC, who I have both hosting playoff games. Michigan, I don't know if they're hosting quite, so don't quote me on that, but I definitely believe USC will host a playoff game. I have A&M, Texas A&M, and Miami making the first ever college football playoffs, their first ever, along with USC and Utah. And I have Alabama making it as well. So those are my teams that I think will make the college football playoff. Those are my teams to do that. So thank you, Justin Ziegler, for that $10 super chat. I really, really appreciate it. Okay. Let me see. Based on everything else I have to do, this looks good. And then tomorrow, again, everyone, we will be live at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, potentially earlier, but no later than 6 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow on Wednesday. And then we'll also be live on Thursday to compensate for the fact that I had a lot planned for Monday and just couldn't get to it. So I had to kind of do a Q&A session then. I'm quickly going to go to the bathroom, and then next up, just to show you all what we're going to be talking about next, we'll do a Florida Gators record prediction coming up next. And welcome back. Thank you for your patience. So I was actually reading something that was pretty insane. Before we get to that, though, Chris Lane, thank you for the $2 super chat. Gotta go. Thanks to all in the chat. I will see you soon. See you soon, Chris Lane. Thank you for coming on and supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. Okay. So apparently, and I should have read this before going live, but I was so invested in getting to what I was trying to cover that I didn't see it. I really should, for the final hour before the show, not do any editing, not do really anything outside of just organizing maybe the show sheet, so that way I can report on breaking news if need be. But, what are you talking about? Or what am I talking about? There are no rules in college football. This was an opinion that I was totally right about. I was right about it from the get-go. It actually makes me happy. An article by Ross Dellinger basically said that NIL collectives aren't restricted. So, if you're Oklahoma or if you're Ohio State, I don't know what you've been doing for the past 3 months. As I just told someone while I was on the toilet, Ohio State could at least afford the mistake because they still have a really high-quality class. It's ranked 7th. They disbanded the foundation and other NIL stuff, so it'll probably take them, a little bit, but not a long time to get it all back up and running again, or maybe Bjork just won't want to get it up and running again. I don't know, but they can afford to do that. Oklahoma can't. I mean, Oklahoma just basically got caught with their pants down. So now what happens is these teams that weren't totally spending above the limit. So USC, Texas Tech, for example, those teams just didn't care. From my perspective, they were spending, and in their mind believing, and now in hindsight probably knowing that this thing wouldn't hold up. For maybe everyone else, there was probably the sense of it probably won't work, but let's have a safeguard in mind just in case. And then it felt like Ohio State and Oklahoma were just believing that that this was going to be enforced and they weren't going to be able to pay players at all. Well, now what's going to happen is these schools that were kind of in the middle are going to jump to the other side, while the schools that were on the polar opposite end of the USCs and Texas Techs are going to have to catch up. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, and I'll talk about specifically how that impacts not just Ohio State, but Oklahoma, and also why this really shows positive things to come for USC and Oregon. Because since that has been rejected, and the College Sports Commission, the College Sports Commission, rolled my tongue there. They didn't even wait for a lawsuit, guys. They just put their hands up. They did what the Michigan fan did in the trouble with the snap. They just did the surrender cobra. They're like, nope. And then they slithered back in their jar. Just not even a fight. That shows that it's gonna take a lot. Again, it's gonna take a collective bargaining agreement for there to be fair and relatively even salaries for players and payments and allocated resources across teams and conferences, or even across the sport as a whole. We are a long ways away, guys. A very long time away from money being evenly distributed. We are so far away from that. So far away. So, yeah, it's just that's what I wanted to tell you. So, that's something I was reading. I'm like, holy cow. Like, wow. Shocking. I thought it would take a lawsuit based on how people were talking about it. And yeah, as a comment just said, OSU will be fine. Don't worry. If there are no rules, they'll have plenty of money. Yes, exactly. But the fact that they went all in on a direction that I think was clearly the wrong direction to be all in on is the thing that is frustrating. I mean, I follow a lot of Buckeye fans on Twitter or on YouTube. It's been a huge topic of discussion. And the reason it's a big topic of discussion is this is not the 2010s Big Ten anymore, where Ohio State can have a bad class by their standards, like they did for the 2019 class, and it doesn't matter because they're that far ahead of everyone else in talent. Ohio State is not that far ahead of Oregon. Like, one bad class and Oregon having another good quality class could put Oregon on a path to be better than them in talent. And then Penn State and Michigan have been recruiting better in the 2020s. Well, Penn State has. Michigan's been recruiting worse, but they've developed much better than in the 2010s. And then we're all seeing what USC is doing right now. It's a much more competitive race for everyone for maintaining and recruiting at a top 10 level now than ever before, because money's involved and because more teams think they can win. And I agree with you, Cole, that Ohio State fans are overreacting to the class. It's if you want to be the next Saban dynasty, if you want to be the next Nick Saban as Ryan Day, then yeah, that class is not good. It's bad. But I don't think anyone can be that anyway. I don't. And I don't think that Ohio State has the Oregon or Texas funds to, I don't know, just buy whoever they want to. So I think taking the new era of football into consideration, it's still a pretty good class. Pretty good. Obviously, if you're Ohio State, you want to recruit top 5 every year. If you start consistently recruiting in that 5 to 10 range, you are going to see a drop-off roster-wise. You just are. But let's move on from that, and let's talk about Florida. Let's do that. Yeah. Okay. So the Florida Gators 2025 record prediction. Florida football went 8-5 last year and shocked a lot of people. Went 4-4 in SEC play. They were 10th in the SEC, and they played freshman DJ Lagway, got hurt middle of the year, but still looked good, was one of the best players and one of the better, if not the best QB in every game he played, no matter who he faced. So that's impressive. Florida won the Gasparilla Bowl. They ended off with wins against Ole Miss, LSU. They blew out rival Florida State on the road. And how they finished the year was in stark contrast to how they kicked off the year, where Miami humiliated them. They were down 20-0 at halftime to Texas A&M. When I look at Florida entering 2025, this is a team who can compete for the playoffs. At 9-3 with this schedule, they would get in over some teams and plenty of teams with a 10-2 record. And take note of this. I think Florida can go 10-2. You know, they're plus 1,500 to win the SEC, plus 330 to reach the playoffs. They might have the best QB in the nation, might have the best O-line in the nation. Depending on how quarterback and running back pan out, could have one of the better rushing attacks in America. Their D-line is awesome. Their special teams is great, one of the better special teams units in the country. And while I'm a little bit negative on wide receiver and corner relative to some people, I ultimately think that this Florida team is pretty good, really. It's a team that's definitely a sleeper in the SEC. You know, a lot of these people talk about LSU, and LSU in theory should be better than Florida. But I look at Florida, and I say, I have DJ Lagway on my first team All-SEC and as an All-American. My All-SEC teams and all-conference teams in general are larger, so there'll be a lot of players mentioned on here, but bear with me. Jaden Baugh and Jacoby Jackson at running back, Jake Slaughter at center, Kenijay Harris and Damian George at guard, Austin Barber at tackle. I have Eugene Wilson III at wide receiver. I have Caleb Banks, D-tackle, on my All-SEC team, same with Tyreek Sapp at edge, Miles Graham and Grayson Howard there at linebacker, Jordan Castell, along with Sharif Denson and Bryce Thornton at safety, and then Devin Moore at corner. And then also Trey Smack, second best kicker in the SEC behind Georgia's Peyton Woodring, and Tommy Doman as an honorable mention punter. So this team is loaded relative to past Florida teams. Their floor is still pretty low because of the schedule, and I think Billy Napier's coaching is a minus. And as for schedule, it's the toughest in America per FPI. I may not rate it that high. Intuitively, I think Oklahoma and Wisconsin have tougher schedules, but it's a top 5 strength of schedule, no matter how you bounce the ball. Their toughest games are at Miami, Texas at home, at Texas A&M, and Georgia Neutral Field, in my opinion. In preseason S&P Plus, they bring back 64% of their production, which is 30th, and they're top 15 preseason with a 17.3 rating. Looking at their schedule here, LIU at home week 1, auto win. USF at home week 2, maybe an auto win. Should be, but USF played some people tough last year, so don't overlook them. Week 3, they play at LSU. Then week 4, they have at Miami. Off their week 5 bye, they host Texas, then play at Texas A&M, host Mississippi State. Off a week 9 bye, they play Georgia Neutral Field week 10, play at Kentucky week 11, play at Ole Miss week 12, host Tennessee week 13, and host Florida State week 14. That Florida State team will probably be an automatic W for this Florida team. It's a tough schedule, and yet, despite that, they will be at the worst, I think, single-digit underdogs to anyone they play. Unless, of course, they start the year off rough and maybe Texas or A&M or one of these teams from week 3 to 7 maybe blows them out, for example. Then maybe by the time they play Georgia, they'd be a double-digit underdog. But against Texas, A&M, Miami, and LSU, unless one of those games goes very, very wrong, I don't see this team being a double-digit underdog likely to anyone in my mind. So it's a schedule where, again, I can see 10 wins. I can see 9 wins. I could also see 6. I could see 7 if everything goes wrong. Maybe Lagway gets hurt and doesn't play for most of the year. I could see 5, or worse than that even. But this team's tough. They play for their coach. Napier's game management is a weakness, but they play for him. They care, and they're deep, they're well-conditioned, they're strong, they're big. There's a lot to like about Florida. I have them going 7-5 again, 4-4 in SEC play. They'll play in a bowl game. Napier wouldn't get fired for this. I think he'd have to regress, but I think he'll enter 2026 under pressure. The reason I'm not picking Florida to go higher, even though they could, is in large part due to Napier's game management and coaching, and the fact that I don't think this roster is invincible. Like, Lagway could be Cam Newton, as some have suggested, but I question whether he will be or not. I question that. It took Cam Newton to be, I believe, either a junior or senior or redshirt junior to be as good as he is. Is Lagway really going to be that fantastic as a true sophomore, coming off of an injury? I don't know. I think he's going to be pretty good, though. Very good. And I think that in most of their 5 losses, if not all of them, they will be competitive, and they will lose by single digits or maybe 2 scores at the most. And in 7 of their wins, they'll probably blow almost every one of those teams out, with maybe the exception of 1. This is a top 20, top 15 power-rated team, much like S&P Plus implies. Getting to some more specific predictions I have for Florida. So I have a mild, medium, hot, and scorching prediction. I have those. Kind of a Scoville scale model. So mild is what I think is a layup prediction for Florida to make. Hellfire is one that is unlikely or bold relative to public opinion or even my personal taste. My mild prediction is that DJ Lagway is a top 10 quarterback nationally, and he keeps Florida in big games. I think that's a given. My medium prediction is that the Gators win 2 or more SEC games on the road. So you have LSU, A&M, Kentucky, and Mississippi on the road. That's what you have. Those are your road games. I think they split those and win half of them. My hot prediction is that Florida's team quality improves drastically, and the team improves as the year goes on, which is a hot prediction. My scorching prediction, Billy Napier is either under pressure or on the hot seat entering 2026. My hellfire prediction is that despite all the improvements, Florida will go 8-4 or worse in 2025. I believe that you need good coaching to win a lot of good games, to beat teams in tight environments. And Florida, I think, has some good positional coaching. I think they have good strength and conditioning. I think their culture's solid. But game management is a question. And I think maybe they're just getting some more talent or Lagway having another year away from really exploding. Could be wrong there, and there's a good chance that I'm wrong given how much people love Florida this year, but they're a little bit too trendy for me. Just a little bit. Nonetheless, I think they'll be good. I think if they had an easier schedule, they'd absolutely be competing for a playoff spot this year, if not, their a conference championship game, especially if they were in, say, the Big 12 or the ACC. I think Florida's going to go 7-5, 4-4, play in a bowl game, and yeah, they'll have success this year. That is for sure. Sounds weird to say that, 7-5, 4-4 being a success, but I think with this schedule, if they were to repeat that and look better than last year, not suffer any blowouts, keep their team healthy, I think that would at least classify as maybe getting close to success. I don't know. I think they're a little bit away. Could be wrong, though, especially since most of these players now are Napier's players. That's for sure. Next up, I do want to talk about Minnesota. But before that, just real quick, sorry about all the confusion bouncing around here. There's just some things that I have to do today or tomorrow that I'm trying. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had some things come up today, but yeah, we're still here. That's good. Okay, now we'll talk about Minnesota. That's what we'll talk about now. It's also hot up here. Can the Minnesota Golden Gophers compete for the college football playoff? Can they win 10 games or 9? Or in losing their quarterback, Max Brosmer, losing some players in the offensive line, and star defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman being poached by Miami, is regression inevitable? Minnesota is one of these teams where off an 8-5, 5-4 campaign and winning the Duke's Mayo Bowl and having some close losses to Penn State, to Michigan, having some close clutch wins against USC, for example, last year, where I think a lot of people in Minnesota feel like this team can really take a huge step forward, be a much better team in 2025 than they were in 2024. So I want to explore that and give you my record prediction for Minnesota this year. Let's first take a look at their schedule before getting to the roster, because the roster, it's a PJ Fleck Minnesota roster. It's not going to be the most talented in the world, but it will be well developed and well coached. So their schedule is as follows. Week 1, play Buffalo. Week 2, they play Northwestern State. Week 3, they play at California. Week 4, they get a bye. Off their bye in Week 5, they host Rutgers. Then they play at Ohio State Week 6, host Purdue Week 7, host Nebraska Week 8, play at Iowa Week 9, host Michigan State in Week 10, get a bye Week 11. Week 12, they play at Oregon. 13, they play at Northwestern. And Week 14, they host Wisconsin. It's a schedule that, per FPI, is 26th. It's one of the tougher schedules in the nation, but not the toughest. And outside of Ohio State on the road and Oregon on the road, I think that they can win those 10 games. They won't beat Oregon or Ohio State. I'll tell you that much. They're not going to beat either of those teams. But never say never. Never say never. And in their other 10 games, I think they will be a touchdown underdog at the worst, and in many cases, a touchdown or even double-digit favorite. So their over-under win totals at 6.5. They're plus 1,300 to reach the playoffs, plus 12,000 to win the Big Ten. I love parts of their roster, mainly the running back room and the defense, if I'm going to be honest here. I'm not going to tell you that I love much else with this team, but I have Darius Taylor and A.J. Turner on not just my all Big Ten team, but I actually have both of them on my All-American teams at running back. I think that Minnesota will field one of the best running back rooms in America this year. I have Ashton Beers and Greg Johnson on the interior O-line on my honorable mention all Big Ten teams. Same with Javon Tracy and Logan Loya from Minnesota at wide receiver and Jamison Gears at tight end. I have Mo Omonode D-tackle on my All Big Ten team. Same with Jalen Logan-Redding and Devin Eastern. Anthony Smith, I have at edge for my All Big Ten team. Same with Maverick Baranowski at linebacker, Coy Parrish and Aiden Gooseby at safety, and Zaquan Bryan at corner. This is a loaded defense and an offense that if their offensive line gets some things right and either overperforms or they find a way to, scheme these guys and, use them to the best of their ability, this is a team that could have a lethal rushing attack along with a solid defense. And that's really been the formula in the Big Ten, not just in the Big Ten, but even winning it all these past few years. Ohio State somewhat broke that trend offensively, being much better at passing than running, but defensively they didn't break the trend at all. And then, Michigan, one year they won it all, and Georgia the 2 years before that, they had some explosive passing, but they were more, game control and playing elite defense than they were specifically airing it out. Not that Minnesota will win it all, but they could go 10-2. I think more realistically, their record's going to be capped at 8-4 because Ohio State and Oregon, both on the road, will be much tougher games than Penn State at home, and probably Michigan on the road or USC at home were the two toughest games for Minnesota last year. So they have more games that are guaranteed losses this year than last year, though hindsight, of course, helps with that. So I think their realistic ceiling's 8-4, but if everything goes right, I could see 10-2. And with this schedule, 10-2 could get them in the playoffs. I think worst case 5-7, and I think that's realistic. They bring back 52% of their production, 78th in America, and their S&P Plus rating preseason is a 6, which is 40th. It means Bill Connolly thinks that they are only 6 points better than the average college football team. Drake Lindsey at quarterback is going to be someone to follow, for sure. And he has good enough receivers, halfbacks, tight ends, and potentially a good enough offensive line to where if he plays to his ranking and how much the staff, praises him and the fan base praises him, then Minnesota can certainly be a dangerous team. I'm more in line with thinking this team stays about the same as last year, and maybe with the quarterback change, the coordinator change, the loss of a awesome tackle like Ariante Irise last season, that this team will stay the same or could regress. I think that 6-6, 3-6, 12th in the Big Ten is what they're going to finish this coming year. So they'll once again go to a bowl game, probably win it given it's PJ Fleck. But there are a lot of teams on this schedule that could be better than them. So let's look at this schedule and the teams who could be better than Minnesota. We have Rutgers in week 5. I would have said Cal, but then Cal lost everyone in the spring portal, so I'm not going to say California. Rutgers could be better. Ohio State will be better. Nebraska could be better. Iowa could be better. Michigan State could be better. Oregon could be better. Wisconsin could be better. That's where the 5-7 comes from, because I don't think Minnesota, they could lose to a team, a random team that they shouldn't, but that will probably be to one of the teams who's better than them, and probably a game at home, let's say. So Nebraska, Michigan State, or Wisconsin, or Rutgers, they might lose one of those games where by spread and maybe by how we initially viewed those teams, they shouldn't have lost. For example, the Purdue game in 2022, but then at the end of the year, you think, okay, yeah, that loss made sense. That's where the 5-7 comes from. I don't think that Minnesota will lose to Buffalo or Northwestern State, obviously. Probably won't lose to Cal or Purdue. Every other game is either a likely win to a guaranteed loss on the spectrum. So that is where I got 6-6, 3-6. The defense will be mean. Where I have questions is the scoring offense. I think they'll be able to run the ball pretty well, but they're replacing a kicker. Kesich is gone, and Kesich was pretty reliable. And the guy they brought in, Brady Denenberg, isn't as good based on what I've seen, what I've read, the stats I have observed, the film. So I think that they'll be able to move the ball in between the 20s at points, but even that will be a struggle depending on how Lindsey does. And then in the red zone, what's going to happen if the run gets taken away? What's going to happen when you play a good defense, or a defense that may not even be as fundamentally sound as yours, but is more talented than your offense? What's going to happen? And then I just with the special teams likely regressing, and the fact that there's quarterback questions. I'm uncomfortable picking them to win more than 6 games at this point. Some specific predictions I have for Minnesota are that this team will improve in terms of running the ball, where they were just a little bit weaker than anticipated from my perspective last year, and it will be at a good pace with Darius Taylor and A.J. Turner. I think that they will have success on the ground. The Golden Gophers will take a step back. That's my medium prediction as a unit, just due to staff changes and lost production. My hot take, going up the Scoville scale here, Minnesota's defense finishes the season around a top 15 level of play, averaging points per game and efficiency. I don't think Danny Collins in year 1 is going to suffer a massive drop-off. Probably a little drop-off, but not much. Minnesota returns Parrish, their most talented player on that side of the ball. They made great portal additions there and brought back key starters. I think it'll be top 15, at least, in points per game and efficiency, averaging that. In my Scorchin prediction, I think Coy Parrish will be used as a two-way player, and he'll excel on both sides of the football. So he's been getting some snaps on offense, learning the offensive playbook. He said that he wants to do well there, and that's been his dream, to play both sides of the ball on offense and on defense. Obviously, he'll be better on defense, but I think to myself that they could use him on offense. And if he's healthy, if he has the stamina, why not? I think that the offense really could use some depth and X-factor play. I think the defense already has that with Parrish, and I think even without it, because the defense has a lot of age. They even have some size to them. I think they're well coached there, better coached than on offense. I think they're going to use Parrish on offense. My Hellfire prediction is that Flex Squad fails to beat one team with a record above 500. That is my Hellfire prediction. And I do think that to a certain degree, Fleck will enter 2026 under pressure. To a certain degree. Now, last year, 8-5 with that team, I think was good. I think that was a good performance. It was better than I expected. For the first time in a while, I traditionally overrated PJ Fleck teams. For the first time in a while, they went over my preseason record prediction. I predicted them, I think, to go 7-6 last year, which is kind of what I'm predicting them to go this year. And instead, they went 8-5. And I hope Minnesota proves me wrong. I hope they do better than I expect. It's fun to see one of those Big Ten West teams punch above their weight class and do super well. But I think there are limitations to this team, and the schedule is tougher than you might think, because I have a Minnesota fan who's told me over and over again, Sam, don't buy in on Nebraska. They never get up. They're always overhyped. Well, they reached a bowl game for the first time in a while last year, and signs point to them improving, so they could be better. Minnesota struggles to beat Iowa. Like, Iowa owns PJ Fleck. They do, and they have to play him on the road, and Iowa's not going to overlook Minnesota there. It's a rivalry game. Michigan State has more proven QB play, and their staff is proven, based on what Rossi did at Minnesota a few years ago and what Smith and his offensive staff did at Oregon State, they're proven to be physical. So they could be better than Minnesota. We know Ohio State and Oregon will be. Wisconsin could be. I mean, Wisconsin made wonderful moves in the portal, and they've been recruiting well, and I think Fickell's a good coach. I think even Minnesota fans would say that Fickell is a good coach. So there's just a lot that could go wrong for Minnesota, more than I think what could go right. I still think that this roster's good. The team is probably an above-average Power 4 team, and I think that Fleck's a good coach. I could see them punching above their weight class and being a top 25 team, or at least ranked there, or even in the power ratings. They were nearly top 25 in power ratings last year with how competitively they played Penn State, USC, Michigan, for example, and how they beat Illinois on the road. You get my opinion there, and then also how they crushed Wisconsin at the end of the year. All that stuff benefited Minnesota in power ratings. Wouldn't shock me if they were a better team. I think that they will regress a little bit due to some reasons I already explained, mainly loss of production at quarterback, the offensive line, the changing at defensive coordinator, and I think Heatherman was very good. It's unfortunate Minnesota lost him, and also the special teams. Those are reasons why I think Minnesota will take a step back. but they'll still go to a bowl game due to a solid defense, and I could see them, because of players like Coy Parrish, because of their defensive line, and a player like Darius Taylor, I could see them proving me wrong. Alrighty, before we get to my Texas A&M preview, I want to read a super chat from Bald Father Bets. So let me pull up this super chat yet again, and from here, we will talk about it. Yeah. So let me pull that up really quick. Okay. Alrighty. So, super chat. Bald Father Bets, he says, based on these Ohio State fans, I'm starting to think Texas should forfeit the first game, save the embarrassment of what will happen, and the team getting injured by being dominated. If they lose 70-0, the committee may not forgive. Okay, so Bald Father Bets, thank you for both the humor. that almost made me crack up during my Minnesota prediction, which would have been quite unprofessional in a show that I don't think has, been the most professional so far. So that would have went from maybe mediocre or bad to worse. But this one is this one's hilarious. He made one a little bit ago talking about how Ohio State would have beaten the Eagles in 2020. The 2024 Buckeyes would have beaten the Eagles, and that one was hilarious. So this one's being saved yet again. Man, I got to tell you guys before we move on here, and again, thank you, Bald Father Bets, for the $20 super chat. He'll be back on again pretty soon, perhaps even this week or next week or just at some point. But he's been on the show multiple times in the preseason already. You should check out his stuff. If you bet using his model, which he doesn't tell you what his model is in college football, but he gives you his picks, you'll win money. Like he performed at a very high level against the spread in college football. And he also gives great analysis that isn't just for betting. So check out his channel, Bald Father Bets. But I will say, reading into some of these, pro Ohio State predictions, how Paul Feinbaum, with his analysis on why Texas would win was one of the most brain-dead takes I've ever seen. At least he talked about quarterback. At least he talked about, Arch Manning's going to be really generational. Sayan just won't quite be that way, and that'll lead, to a win. I've seen a lot of, whether it's Ohio State accounts or Big Ten people, they're assuming that Texas will just fold because they folded in the past in big games, and that's why Ohio State will win. Steve Dace today, I need to watch his video. I'll probably do that while mowing the lawn. But I'll listen to his stuff about, his crystal balls for the season. The main thing about why Ohio State will beat Texas is the fact that Arch won't be able to handle the environment. And I think to myself, it's a noon game. Ohio State at night, I get, because Ohio State at night is probably anywhere from 3 to 7 points more valuable than at noon. At noon, if Ohio State isn't doing well, they'll start to boo the team. You have that juxtaposition. Of course, for the Indiana game, they got up, and that was big, but it was still nowhere near what Tennessee was. And Manning has played in these environments before. I know whether it's a few snaps here or there, but still, he has. He's been at a Texas night game. He played Georgia in Mercedes-Benz afternoon in an indoor stadium that traps noise and was mostly Georgia fans. He played a snap in the Cotton Bowl. I think a snap against Clemson at home again for an afternoon game. So I just don't get it. You can pick Ohio State to win. I think there are 10 reasons around why Ohio State can win and 15 for why Texas can win. You can pick Ohio State to win. Just don't tell me that the stadium is going to cause it. Just don't do that. Don't do it. It's so intellectually dishonest. It's beyond dishonest. They're just gonna enter the stadium and they're gonna fall over. It's stupid. That's not what's gonna happen. And if you want to tell me that Texas is overrated, tell me why Ohio State isn't. I can tell you why I think Texas is somewhat properly valued, although some of the preseason hype's unwarranted, and also why I think Ohio State's in general an overvalued team. I think that Texas is bigger in the interior lines of scrimmage. They have a quarterback with 4 more starts than Ohio State's, who is more generational coming out of high school per the recruiting services and per scouts. And he's a year older. And Texas, they have staff continuity. Ohio State doesn't. Texas they don't have Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, but they have Ryan Wingo and Colin Simmons and DJ Campbell and Anthony Hill Jr. and Michael Taff and Trey Moore. And they have like DeAndre Moore Jr. and CJ Baxter. Like they don't have the 2 best players in America, but they probably have more top 100 players on the roster than Ohio State does. Like their roster is more balanced. And we knew that last year entering the Cotton Bowl. Like they're better in the trenches. Defenses are close. Ohio State's better on the outside, better at QB. Now, Ohio State loses some coordinators and some staffers. They return the 2 best players in America, but lose a lot of like more starters and elite players than Texas does. And here you are. Texas returns a little bit more production than Ohio State. They had the better portal class. They had the better recruiting class. Although that doesn't matter all that much for this year. That's more like down the road. So maybe next year's matchup in Austin when Ohio State travels to play Texas there. Just don't give Ohio State's going to lose because Ryan Day sucks, or Texas is going to lose because Texas is never back. Like, don't stoop to that level of analysis, and I'm seeing way too much of that for this Texas-Ohio State game. And I don't know why I'm seeing that. Like, maybe I'm wrong, but I think part of it's because people aren't confident with how much both teams lose, they're not confident in telling you what they are. And I also think that, I don't know, I think maybe media people don't want the target put on their back because their fan bases are huge, especially Ohio State's, and that stuff matters for ratings, for example. But let's get to this A&M thing, and then let me get off. Okay. I think the A&M, I believe the Texas A&M Aggies are a college football playoff contender this season, and I'm going to tell you why. Yes, they went 8-5 last year, 5-3 in the SEC, and they lost the Las Vegas Bowl to a 6-6 USC team. They started out the year 8-2 and finished 8-5. I know. And I know that under Jimbo Fisher, they never fulfilled the hype. I do. One year I picked them to, and the other 2-3 years I thought that they were kind of bleh. They weren't going to do all that much. I jumped on that trend of, avoid A&M, they're overrated. But Elko's a much better coach than Fisher. Far superior coach to Fisher. And he has a good staff. They've recruited at a similar level, but developed much better. They have a young quarterback who started for much of last year, who I think will take big leaps entering this season. Elko's getting more involved on the defense, and I think that will help. And look, they're plus 1,500 to win the SEC, plus 235 to reach the playoffs. Their win total is 7.5, and I'm going to tell you right now, I think that's a little low. I think it should be 8.5. Could be wrong. Vegas knows more than I, but I love A&M this year. I absolutely love them. You know, their strength of schedule is 9th per ESPN's FPI, and they have tough games at Notre Dame, LSU, Missouri, at Texas as well. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough outing for sure. But they're top 10 in blue chip ratio. They have a top 10 roster in terms of talent. They have better strength and conditioning, better assistant coaching, better play calling, and better CEO and game management and locker room management under Elko and his staff than they ever did under Jimbo Fisher and his staff. So outside of playing, at Notre Dame and at Texas and Missouri, LSU, and Arkansas on the road, here's their whole schedule. Week 1, UTSA. Week 2, Utah State. Week 3 is that trip to Notre Dame. Week 4, they get a bye. Off the week 4 bye, they play Auburn at home week 5, Mississippi State at home week 6, Florida at home week 7. 3 home games in a row, and yes, it's followed up with 2 back-to-back road trips, but 3 home games in a row is very advantageous, especially with Kyle Field. At Arkansas week 8, at LSU week 9. That's a tough stretch, but they get a bye week 10. They then have to travel to Missouri week 11, host South Carolina week 12, Samford week 13, then they have to play at Texas in week 14. Realistically, I don't think they'll go any better than 11-1, but they could go 12-0. I think maybe Texas takes a huge step back. Florida doesn't play to their potential. They beat Notre Dame on the road because Notre Dame's young and it's early, and LSU falls apart. There's a path where they could, finally fulfill those uber recruiting classes that they've taken and have a bunch of success. I also think they could go 8-4 again, or if a lot of things fall apart, I think they could go 7-5 as well. But I'm positive with A&M probably everywhere except for, I would say, tight end, honestly. So when I look at them and their roster, I have Marcel Reed in my All-ACC team. Same with Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels at running back. I have starting center Kolinu is that Fayu? Is that how you say his last name? At center. Hopefully I said that correctly. Armaj Reed Adams at guard, along with Chase Basantis. I have my All-SEC team. Trey Zunn III and Demetrius Crownover are my top 2 tackles. Top 2 in the SEC. And then at wide receiver, I have Kevin Concepcion, Terry Bussey. That's my offense. And my All-SEC teams are larger, and there are more teams than most other people's all-conference and all-American teams. But still, only good players are represented. At D-tackle, I have Albert Regis and Tyler Onyedim represented. I have Cassius Howell represented at edge. Linebacker, Scooby Williams and Tareen York. Marcus Ratcliffe at safety. And Will Lee III and Julian Humphrey at corner, along with Randy Bond, the kicker, and Tyler White, the punter, and Terry Bussey at return specialist as well. Special teams will be good. Offense should take a step forward, I think, especially in the ground game department. But they should be able to relieve wide receiver, even with Noah Thomas's absence, him transferring to Georgia. And the defense, I think, should get better too, as Elko's going to be more involved. It'll be second season with Elko, and he's known to be a defensive mastermind, although Colin Klein, offensive coordinator for the Aggies, is known to be an offensive mastermind. They return 72% of their production, which is 7th, and their preseason S&P Plus rating is a 17.2, which is 15th. I'm picking A&M to go 10-2, 6-2. Tied for 3rd in the SEC with Alabama, actually. So for those of you watching, I am changing Alabama's record prediction from 9-3 to 10-2, 6-2. And I think that A&M will be a college football playoff participant. Between all the games on their schedule, here are, I think, the ones that are losable. Notre Dame on the road, Auburn at home, Florida, at Arkansas and LSU, at Missouri, South Carolina, and at Texas. So I think Mississippi State, Samford, UTSA, and Utah State are guaranteed wins. That's 4 guaranteed wins. I look at their guaranteed losses, and I don't see any. The closest would be Texas on the road, but A&M's more experienced now than Texas is. They are going to have a better gain of on-field performance than Texas will, because year 2 is when the great staffs usually make their biggest impact. And it was a close game last year. I mean, Texas owned them on the line of scrimmage, but Texas's turnovers were also a part of their DNA last year, and the fact they couldn't pull away from teams. If that's the case again this year, and A&M fields a better offense and a better defense, they could win that game. So 4 guaranteed wins, 0 guaranteed losses. And I think against teams like Auburn, Arkansas, and South Carolina, they're going to be big favorites. South Carolina's a revenge game, and A&M's much deeper this year. Plus, going from Kyle Field and comparing that to like Williams-Brice Stadium, that's probably a double-digit point swing. And A&M also returns more. So I think A&M will probably win that game. I look at Auburn, should have the better roster, better head coach too, and then Arkansas loses a bunch, and Arkansas will have already gone through a lot of their tough games by the time they play A&M, so they could be beaten down. That's why I'm going with 10-2 here. I think that they'll lose 2 of those games, more likely Texas than anyone else, and then, whether it's LSU or Missouri or maybe Florida, even though that game's at home, they'll slip up another time, but they'll be a college football playoff participant from my perspective. Moving on to some predictions that I have for A&M. Going on a Scoville scale here. So I have a mild prediction, a medium one, hot one, scorching one, and a hellfire one. My mild prediction is that the defense improves while the defense improves with Elko being more involved in play calling and game planning. Should say with, not will. My medium prediction is that A&M will lead the SEC in rushing yards per game and yards per carry. I think that with what they bring back on the O-line, with Marcel Reed being mobile, and then Amari Daniels and Le'Veon Moss, that they were top 4 in yards per carry in the SEC last year, and they were second in rushing yards per game. With all they bring back, I think they will be first. A chance they'll be first there by a long shot. My hot prediction is that Marcel Reed will be a top 25 quarterback in college football this season. I've just seen a lot of skepticism from whether it's the Cover 3 podcast or some people I trust, to where I think he'll be top 25. I think he'll develop nicely, but some don't. So there's some boldness to that prediction. My scorchin' prediction, the Aggies will reach the college football playoffs for the first time in school history. Scorchin' because their win total is 7.5, and because of their prior history of being ranked high and then disappointing, and their schedule's tough enough to where 9-3 is very likely here. My hellfire prediction is that A&M will do such a good job this year that Elko will win SEC Coach of the Year. Won't be Sark, won't be Kirby, won't be DeBoer, won't be Billy Napier or Brian Kelly, won't be Brent Venables, even though I think they'll rebound. It will be Mike Elko. Mike Elko is your 2025, my prediction at least, Mike Elko will be your 2025 SEC Coach of the Year. I'm high on A&M for the first time in a while. I was somewhat high on them last year, not going to lie. Somewhat high on them, but I expected Notre Dame to win that game in week 1. Did not expect what followed that game, nor did I expect some things that followed A&M, where I thought they'd get better as the year went on, and then things kind of blew out as the year progressed. But this year I'm high on them, and I'm telling you, you got to buy into A&M, not just now, but for the future, for the long term, because Elko's a good coach. He'll do what he has to get A&M to the playoffs consistently and be a true top-tier program and roster year in and year out, unlike the ultimate scam artist and snake oil salesman, Jimbo Fisher. And we're done here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's make sure we don't have any more super chats here. But yeah, we're done here. Tomorrow we're going to do many more topics, but probably some shorter ones. So no 30-minute, which teams are most likely to return to the playoffs, for example. Let me just read some final comments. Let me see. Baldfather Betts saying the doom and gloom predictions by the fan base for the other team in the game are wild. Let me see. The 2 best players in America, asked Scott D. Yeah, the 2 best players in America are Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. Because college football is a chaotic sport, there is a chance, there's a small chance, I'm not picking it to happen, but there's always a chance that one of them gets a little dinged up or regresses, and they won't be the 2 top players in America. But one of them definitely will be, because the odds of both getting injured or regressing are almost 0. And the odds are that they will be the 2 best players more than anyone else will be better than them outside of each other. So, yes, they are the 2 best players. I feel like saying versus the Texas pass rush is a more tangible topic than Arch versus the environment of the shoe. Oh, yeah. And speaking of the environment of the shoe, Baldfather Betts, what happens if Sayan throws a pick 6 and the crowd is extremely irritable? Can't the crowd also put more pressure on Sayan than maybe it does Arch, depending on how that game goes? Cole Werebridge, you aren't wrong. Texas pass rush is great. I'm not saying that Archer's going to fold under the pressure in the shoe, but I don't think he's going to be the greatest QB ever the first game like Paul Finn Dummy thinks. Yeah, he won't be. I'm not even picking Arch Manning to be a top 2 quarterback in football this year. My top 2 QBs are Klubnik and Sellers, and I think that Lagway and Aller probably round out your top 4. Manning will be a top 10 QB this year, will get first-round buzz. I think there's a good chance he'll come back for 2026 and be even better then. He won't be the best quarterback in America in week 1. He won't. That's all I have to say for today, though. Thank you guys